Good morning and welcome to day number 2 of Covestro's THINC30 Summit. My name is Hagen Johnson. I'm the chairman and president of Covestro LLC, and I'm coming to you this morning from beautiful Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and our US headquarters. For those of you joining us for the first time, it's great to have you as part of our THINC30 community. And of course, for everyone who logged in last Thursday for day 1, we are more than delighted to have you with us again. Today we're going to continue the work we started some 4 years ago with THINC30. Work designed to use the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to create a more just, equitable society that is sustainable and includes everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, from the richest to the poorest, all races, ethnicities, genders, and religions. I don't have to tell you, this has been an historic year. What some call a trifecta of pandemic, racial justice, and economic uncertainty. For me and my colleagues at Covestro, it's made the goals and what they're designed to achieve more relevant than ever, and really put a foot on the accelerator for change, so that everyone has an equal shot and access to quality education, decent housing, clean air and water, and good jobs and economic opportunity. It's no accident that the global goals are built on the 3 pillars of social, environmental, and economic equity, because that's what sustainability is all about. As one of the world's leading suppliers of innovative high-tech polymer materials, we recognize we are just one small part of a larger ecosystem that requires equity across the board if we are truly to succeed. I can't sit here today and honestly tell you that we are there yet, but I can tell you we're working hard to get there and that the goals are crucial to our work. Today's topic is environmental equity. Now, many of you know the Sustainable Development Goals are not 17 individual goals. They are a universal agenda with 17 interconnected goals. And that means environmental disparities often create disparities in other areas like education, jobs, and community investment. So when you correct one, you can also correct others. Now, the big question we're asking today is this: how can the city of Pittsburgh, its neighborhoods, organizations, and businesses step up the sustainable practices to drive environmental justice? And to answer this, we have some great speakers and panelists who are going to share their strategies. And now, to tell you more about what's ahead for today, here's my colleague, Rebecca LeCour. Rebecca?
And another welcome to all of you to day 2 of THINC30, Environmental Equity. Again, welcome back to those of you who were with us on day 1 last week. And if you're joining us for the first time, we're so glad to have you with us and for these very important discussions. And a special thank you, as always, to our panelists and our speakers for sharing your time with us today. If you were here last week, you may have heard me said we stopped for a brief moment. We talked about the energy we always felt in the room at our in-person live THINC30 events, and should we even be having this event virtual this year? And it was very quick. Yes, we must have the discussions this year. With everything going on, it's important now more than ever, and not just to talk about some of the gaps and some of the obstacles, but even more important sometimes to talk about the really good, positive work in leadership going on right now in our region and around the country. And it's important to highlight that good work and to help grow it and put a fire under it. Making connections and the UN SDG number 17 goal, partnerships for the goals, will always be front and center for THINC30, whether we're having in person or a live event. So let's talk about the THINC30 format. It's 3 days, 3 hours, 3 pillars of sustainability. Last week, we talked about social resilience. We heard from experts in working in public health, in education, food security, community development, and the nonprofit world. And today we have experts with us to talk about healthy neighborhoods, environmental justice, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, sustainability strategy, to name a few things. And on Thursday, we'll conclude day number 3 with wide-ranging discussions on economic empowerment. And of course, during all 3 days, all of these topics overlap because sustainability is all-encompassing and social resilience spills over with economic empowerment and also environmental equity. But before we jump into the first session, just a few reminders and housekeeping items. Each day will run about 2 hours from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Most live panels will include time for audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your windows to submit your questions. Do not use the chat for questions directly to the panelists. We will only be looking in Q&A. However, please feel free throughout the morning to use your chat button to talk to other attendees, to leave other questions or information. We'll keep a catalog of that throughout the day. Each day, we're going to wrap up with a 30-minute breakout session, and I'll share a little more about that as we wrap up at 11 o'clock today and how you can join that. It's your opportunity to roll up your sleeves, talk to other attendees, and dig into a specific topic and issues that are important to you. Please use our Covestro website at www.covestro.us.com/think30 to follow each day's agenda. You can get speaker background and bios there as well. And we want to see photos of you attending online on your computer. You can tweet those at #think30. Okay, let's get started. Welcome back. So 1 short year ago, the city of Pittsburgh announced its commitment to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, joining New York City as the only 2 cities to do so. So exactly where are we today in terms of progress 1 year later? What's been accomplished? What does it mean for Pittsburgh and the region's long-term sustainability? And what's next? These are the questions we'll explore with our 2 speakers this morning. Please join me in welcoming Grant Urban, who's the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Pittsburgh, and Saheed Hussain, who most recently served as Millville Sustainability Coordinator and Director of Sustainability at New Sun Rising. Welcome to both.
Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning. Glad to have you both with us. So Grant, we're going to start with you. So how is Pittsburgh doing with achieving the UN goals, and what have been some of the biggest accomplishments, and what work still needs to be done?
Well, thanks, Rebecca, and thanks to the folks at Covestro. It's really a great pleasure to be here with everyone today. First, I also like to share a deep thanks to Covestro, because in many ways, it was Jerry McCleary and yourself who helped us kind of get started on our journey with the SDGs in terms of understanding what they mean for an organization and how they can benchmark their performance. So a big thanks to you guys for helping introduce the SDGs to us here in Pittsburgh. One of the big things that we've done over the course of the last year since announcing our commitment to the SDGs back last fall is to begin the process of what's called a voluntary local review. And this is a process that was pioneered by Alex Hineker, a colleague who was at the City of New York and is now at Carnegie Mellon University, in developing kind of an introspective look of the 17 global goals on municipal government. So typically in the SDG speak, nation states undertake a voluntary national review. But cities have started to pick up that mantle, and it's been in part because of leadership of folks like Alex, as well as colleagues that we have encountered through a network of cities around the world from the Brookings Institution. And the Brookings Network has been a really great kind of cradle, if you will, for integrating the SDGs into the work of local government, whether it's through a voluntary local review, benchmarking performance against those 17 goals, or looking at innovative ways to intersect the SDGs into the work of local government services and infrastructure. So beginning last spring, we started to begin the process of effectively almost a community organizing activity within city government. So one-on-one interviews, focus groups, small kind of working groups that were working on each of the 17 goals and asking ourselves that question that you just asked me: how are we doing with regards to our participation in the 17 goals? And what we found is that there's a lot more beneath the surface than what we even could imagine in terms of understanding the different aspects from procurement to biking and pedestrian infrastructure development work, that the employees of the city of Pittsburgh were really recognizing kind of the role that they play in achieving these goals, and most importantly, what they can do together. So what we've started to do is to see those intersections, and they've already started to percolate a host of activities. For example, myself and my colleague Jen Olsinger, who is our lead on procurement, is working right now on intersecting through the Global Lead Cities Network on sustainable procurement. So we're looking at all of those aspects that come through our supply chain and how they start to meet the 17 global goals. Another key benchmark has been our measurement of developing an ESG policy for our city's pension fund. So effectively aligning our environmental, social, and governance goals against $600 million investments that we have in our pension assets. And those are the sorts of things that now that employees are connecting and communicating with one another, we're seeing kind of this work really percolate towards achievement of the goals. Also, finally, one of the things that we'll be doing is releasing our VLR. It's going through a quality control, quality assurance process right now, and hopefully we'll have that out by the end of the month. So a lot of progress in just a short amount of time.
So Grant, what do you think you're, as a city and as you're looking at these goals, what do you think you're doing best? If one thing jumps out at you, what area, which goal maybe? Which goal?
Oh, it's like picking a favorite child. That's not fair. Well, I mean, personally, so I'm involved a lot in our work in energy procurement. And one of the things that we were able to do this year is effectively move all of our electricity purchases to 100% renewable electricity. So anytime that you plug a device or a piece of equipment into a plug in a city of Pittsburgh facility, you're going to be receiving 100% renewable electricity. So that was a big guide of our climate action plan. But really what's kind of special about that for me is that's not just me and my department. It's public works. It's the Office of Management and Budget. It's city council. It really takes kind of a whole village to make something like that happen. And it's all kind of with these North Stars of the global goals that are mine that we're then achieving kind of that measure.
Okay, and don't worry, Grant, I won't tell the other goals which one's your favorite. So Zaheen, so I have a couple tiered questions for you. First, I hope you can tell us a little bit about New Sun Rising, and then talk about Millville specifically and its journey to sustainability, and talk about its status as an eco district, and maybe a little bit of background on the story for other communities looking to build a similar journey.
Sure. Channeling Grant, Rebecca, and to all of Covestro and the THINC30 conference, thank you for including us and giving us the opportunity to share the work. Rebecca and Grant, always good to see you both at these things, normally in person, but today online. As folks might have seen in the intro slide, I am now a grad student at Carnegie Mellon and excited to connect with folks like Alex Hinnicker working on SDGs and global goals here in Pittsburgh and beyond. But to speak to New Sun Rising a little bit, New Sun Rising is a 501c3 nonprofit. It works to help build community capacity in the areas of culture, sustainability, and opportunity, and drives community vibrancy. Really thinking through how to work with and build capacity within community businesses, individuals, and leaders in order to navigate this kind of work at the neighborhood level and at the small municipal level. To that end, speaking directly to UN SDGs and global goals, New Sun Rising's been working on building an interactive tool called the Vibrancy Index that really lists out all 17 global goals and has a data information system through a platform called SOPACT that New Sun Rising works works with partners to upload their contribution towards global goals as a way to map regional activity from small organizations as well as neighborhoods and small municipalities throughout Allegheny County. Now, getting a little bit into the Millville work, New Sun Rising is one of the 4 key partner organizations of the Millville Eco District Collaborative, and is in fact the backbone organization of the Millville Eco District Collaborative. The Millville Eco District, so Eco District is a planning process, that's a whole nother talk another time, but is a member of the Triborough Eco District, which is a collaboration between the communities of Millville, Etna, and Sharpsburg, in leveraging shared challenges and opportunities to catalyze economic development through the lens of sustainability. Now, more directly, just I guess the story of Millville, Rebecca, as you asked, as of the last census, Millville, which sits across the river from the city of Pittsburgh, had a youth poverty rate of over 45%. In addition, Millville sits at the bottom of a watershed that has seen massive development over the last 50 years, contributing to environmental challenges on top of economic challenges. After a series of floods in the mid-2000s, community members who represented a broad spectrum of political views got together and really wanted to address the issues that the community was facing. And it's at that time that this concept, this idea of centering economic development alongside sustainability and equity really started to take root, regardless of where people's political leanings were, because of the shared trauma that the community felt and wanted to address together. So over the last 15 or so years, the community has been working to build leadership from within, building relationships outside of the community to leverage collaboration and the resources that exist within the Pittsburgh region. And then really has buckled down to think through, as the region shifts and grows, how can Millville put itself at the front of this kind of 21st century development that we're seeing happen across the region. collaboration with organizations, as well as looking to the work that the city is doing, is a huge component of the work. Knowing that, we can make Millvale the most sustainable 0.68 square miles in the whole world, but if that's all we're limited to, then we aren't really going to have the impact that we want to have within our community. So it's wonderful to have organizations like Sustainable Pittsburgh, Green Building Alliance, the City of Pittsburgh, et cetera, that we can all work with, learn from, share our learnings with, just to continue building forward as a region. To me, what Millvale's story is really about is one, it's a story of encouraging patience. None of this work happens overnight. This is long-term sustained work that takes a lot of energy, but it also shows that with leadership development, with grit and gumption, any community can really take on this work as long as they're committed to it. And I hope that shines through in the work that we do and the partnerships we're able to continue to build.
So you both have really good strategies, and you started down your journeys, and you had a very clear path, I think, ahead of you that you set, and then the world stops on a dime. So how has this pandemic impacted all of your work? Have priorities shifted? Are there things are there different paths you have to take now, or different directions because of all this?
Yeah, I'll start off. I think that the pandemic has done a couple things. I mean, one, from a work platform standpoint, it has allowed certain collaborations to gel quicker. And I mean that in an internal sense, so one of the things you mentioned, the world stopped. It was a Herculean lift for our IT department to move 1,500 employees onto a virtual platform in 2 weeks, right? And so that was a huge lift. But one of the things instantaneously, once we started to figure out, what Zoom was and those sorts of things, we were able to start to collaborate internally. And that's been a benefit. It's starting to wane, and I think people are starting to have some of that fatigue a little bit. But initially, everybody hit the ground running and focused on some project management. The other thing on I'm going to call it a negative standpoint, but I don't know that it is negative. Is that the pandemic, and anytime you have, this is my resilience hat on, anytime that you have a shock, it oftentimes uncovers the stressors underneath. And what we've seen, whether it is the connection with climate, if folks remember what the air smelled like, and what the neighborhood didn't sound like back in April and May, we understand the impact more that we have on the earth. And I think that moment of silence and clarity was a great awakening in many respects. Likewise, a second great awakening, I think, has because of the economic strife and the public health crisis. We have seen a lot of things that, those of us in kind of the Pittsburgh SDG circles, I'm going to say, have been talking about for a long time, which has been the systemic inequalities that our society faces. And so it is clear and laid bare. And it is kind of uncovered, I think, a lot of visceral feelings and internal feelings that people have. And that's out on the table now in a way that it hasn't been in my lifetime. And I think that's a positive trajectory for us in terms of dealing with some of the underlying challenges that we face as humanity, frankly.
I think those are really great points. I think we all remember when we were all kind of closed down at home and huddling with our families, and for a couple months, all the images on TV of how the earth and how the larger cities have changed dramatically with everyone staying at home and no cars on the road, and buildings aren't at full utilization. And then we saw the images too of wildlife going across the Golden Gate Bridge and out and about in areas they would never be in because people just weren't around. So it does put a lot on the table. It makes us think of how it could be, and some of the things that we can really look at to make a difference. So Sahin, what have you seen in your work?
Well, I kid you not, a herd of deer took over our main street in Millvale in the middle of lockdown, which had shades of I Am Legend here in Millvale. But, I guess on a more serious note, our work changed at the drop of a hat. It was really incredible thinking back to those days, how surreal it feels now. But because of the work that we've done building the relationships that we have in our community, we were able to pretty immediately pivot our work away from, what we had planned for 2020. And, with the graces of our funding partners and government partners, we were able to redirect our work almost immediately to COVID relief and response throughout our work at New Sun Rising, but also our work directly with the Millvale Eco District and the Triborough Eco District. Not to repeat everything that Grant said, so I won't. What I will say about this time is that the work that we did to build relationships within our community and partnerships outside of our community was critical in us being able to be nimble in our response to COVID, both kind of at that moment of shock when everything was changing really quickly, and even now as things have kind of settled down and we're looking at this as a more of a long-term response. Without, again, the decade plus of work done in the community to really build capacity, we would have been a lot slower in our response.
I think, you've both talked about collaboration unprompted in both of your discussions. So what are some of the ways that you sought out input of all Pittsburghers, or continue to, and especially during the pandemic, when we're, I think, Grant, you mentioned, or Zaheen, when we're not all in these meetings, we all convene, we would see each other basically every other day at some meeting around these topics. How are you making those connections, and how are you reaching out in a time like this to make sure you're getting the input and participation and engagement from Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I'll give two quick examples. One, just towards our SDG work. I mentioned a little bit about kind of our city partnership, but we also have this local Pittsburgh ecosystem that is developing around the SDG. So whether it's the Allegheny Conference's Committee on Sustainability, or our partners at the Forbes Funds and Sustainable Pittsburgh and Coro and New Sun Rising, and a host of other kind of organizations that are surrounding, we have this, like I said, it's an ecosystem. They're mutually supporting one another. So there's a lot of that type of touchstones and engagements that are happening specific to the SDGs, which I think is really starting to flourish and make, the commitment even stronger as it starts to permeate out. And I think you're going to see a lot of great stuff in the next couple of months and years coming forth on that. Second thing, quickly, has been in the city of Pittsburgh, one of the things we've done within the Department of City Planning is create the Engage PGH platform. So this is a public engagement platform that is online and facilitates a host of conversations around community plans or specific projects, and has really become like a great way to have those virtual conversations in a meaningful way, and help to push towards progress in different projects. So those are two quick examples I'd offer up. Good.
So really quickly, I guess, for the work here, in Millvale being a 0.68 square mile municipality, our resources are very limited. So we rely on building partnerships outside of Millvale in order to be able to kind of expand the scope of work that we're able to do. To that end, the Triborough Eco District is a very direct example where three communities, Millvale, Etna, Sharpsburg, that are all very similar in size, all very similar in opportunities and challenges, are able to combine forces and kind of leverage each other's capacity to add more depth to the work that we're able to do, which alone, having lost over 50% of our population over the past 50 years, our revenues don't always meet what we have to spend to not just keep the community where we are, not just to build the community out, but also just to be able to maintain what we have. So collaboration in our work is key. But as far as community engagement goes, we spent years building relationships within the community. So really, it's a matter of just connecting with the people that we already have those relationships with. We kind of did our own community needs assessment where we're able to get responses from over 30% of all households in Millvale, helping understand what people's hopes, needs, and dreams are. That work was already done. Once the pandemic started, it was really about looking and analyzing, what the data was telling us about what people's needs were, looking at what needs would be most directly impacted by the pandemic, and then starting to think programmatically around how to address those challenges as we move through this pandemic. And then obviously the joys of Zoom meetings have been great in maintaining and even in a lot of instances building relationships.
Well, we're winding down our time here. I'm going to ask two things. I have a quick question that came in for you, Grant, that you can have 30 seconds to address. And then I'm actually going to go against what I said earlier and ask, we have some great questions in Q&A for all of the participants here that submitted questions. If you don't mind cutting and pasting and putting them in the chat, then Grant and Zaheen will see them and they can answer you and send you more information and links right in chat. So real quick, 30 seconds, Grant. The question is, City of Pittsburgh uses 100% renewable energy today, or is that a goal?
So right now we're using 100% renewable electricity. And so that is our goal, and we've been able to meet that through renewable energy credits, but we're looking to go beyond that in terms of effectively sourcing that electricity produced locally. So that is kind of the next step for us in our horizon.
Okay. Thank you, Grant and Zaheen. We could obviously talk on this topic for a while. You guys are both doing really good work in your organizations and the city in general. So if people don't mind putting their questions in chat, maybe you can jump in and provide more information or links. So thank you for joining us.
Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Greetings. My name is Glenn Garrett Grayson Jr. I am committed to being comfortable with myself, the value that I bring to the table, and being unapologetic about it. And that is really my story and what I want to talk about today as it pertains to social resilience and proper investment in low-income communities. As a senior program manager of real estate development at Neighborhood Allies, I connect resources, opportunities, and provide technical assistance to local developers, organizations, and community members. And I truly love it. But many lack the public and private capital or organization capacity for development to be successful from beginning to end. Accessible capital and committed resources to these developments and communities have been the biggest obstacles in my work. I have seen truly great projects not succeed, not because of the lack of will, but because of the lack of social and capital investments. What I have not seen is a true commitment to invest and work with low-income communities in a real way. The landscape might be different, but we are still developing and building what they call in my neighborhood projects. Proper investment takes time. It takes a risk. It takes a commitment. And the projects that I have seen succeed had committed parties all around the table. At my organization, we have made a commitment to scale, accelerate, and sustain organizations, individuals, and communities. If 2020 has made me do anything, it has made me think and evaluate what I really value, what really mattered. So I ask you, what do you value? Do you value having clean and healthy environment? Do you value everyone's right to an equitable education? Do you value the senior who has been living in the neighborhood for 50 years? Do you value George Floyd's death and life who was suffocated for 8 minutes and 46 seconds as he screamed, "I can't breathe"? Do you value the community, or have you become the appraiser with no vested interest until there is interest? Has your personal appraisal of a community determined the value of the resources you or your organizations have provided? In order to achieve striving and sustainable communities, this process must not continue. So I ask you, if you're in a position of working with the community or doing community development or even giving funding, and me personally, as a father, a husband, a Hill District resident, and a Black man, I have to be unapologetic in advocating for fair banking practices, increased MWE participation, local hiring, honor community benefits agreements, and capital investment into our low-income communities. We have to be unapologetic in ensuring that there is a community voice, fair wages, and equitable opportunities. Our social resilience depends on our ability to be unapologetic about our causes. So I ask you today, and through this Think Conference, what are you committed to? What do you value? And what are you unapologetic about? It reminds me of this story that my dad used to tell me. There's a little story about 4 people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. There was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. My name is Glenn Garrett Grayson Jr. I am committed to being comfortable with myself, the value that I bring to the table, and being unapologetic about it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. And thank you, first of all, to Rebecca and Covestro and everyone who's put together this event today for inviting me to speak. I'm really happy to be here. I'm the Executive Director of Sustainable Pittsburgh, Joylab Portlock, and I have been tasked with giving an overview of environmental justice for you today as a lead-in, as a segue, and lead into our conversation, which has talked a lot about the community conversation around this, and then into the business conversation about this. So Sustainable Pittsburgh is a 21-year-old organization that works with hundreds of other organizations in the region and across the state. That's local governments, that's businesses, that's communities. Our mission is to empower decision-making that builds a fundamentally equitable, resilient, healthy, and prosperous region, which, as you can imagine, is a mission that has only become more important across these past several months. One of the things I want to tag on to the conversation that was just had on the panel is that collaboration is really a key strength of our region and something that I think we all need to lean into. Collaboration is certainly how we accomplish our work and is absolutely necessary, I think, to meet the challenges before us. So environmental justice, what does that mean? Well, according to the EPA, the definition of environmental justice or achieving environmental justice will be recognized when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards, and also has equal access to the decision-making table. So there's kind of a two-part goal there to achieving environmental justice. And I want to point out that given the goals of sustainable development, we know that this is work that is not just happening now, or is not just important for the now. It's also important as we look into the future and what structural changes need to be in place so that both of these conditions are met. If we look at what the Pennsylvania definition of environmental justice communities is, that's communities where 20% or more of the people live in poverty, or 30% or more of the population is a minority population. So if you take that definition, you can understand that environmental justice communities are often lower resourced. And what we see in the case of environmental hazards always is that communities with lower amounts of resources are less able to deal with environmental hazards and changes from climate change and other sorts of environmental degradation, a number of which we have here in the region. So what does that look like? That looks like increased susceptibility to damages after flooding. That looks like poorer housing stock that leads to mold growth and exacerbation of disparities around health impacts like asthma, respiratory illness from poor air quality. And there have been a number of studies that have come out recently looking specifically at the increased mortality risk in EJ communities right here in the region from air pollution. There's a disproportionate access to resources. And I actually had a thought while the other conversation was happening, talking about everything that's changed with our ability to, stay home and kind of nature flourishing. It's just a reminder that in this pandemic, there are many, many, many people, and disproportionately people of color, who can't stay home, who are essential workers and are exposed, therefore, disproportionately to the health impacts of the pandemic. So I think it's important to call out, that our communities are weathering all of these storms with different amounts of resources, and that's really what environmental justice comes down to. Now, there are a lot of different remedies for that, some of which are, treating the symptoms, and some are treating the underlying systemic challenges that decrease the options for those living in these communities. So really, I want to talk about, also the work, that's happening, though, from a collaborative level to start to address these factors. One of the things that I think is the most promising about the work that's happening, the collaborations that are happening, is the degree to which we all are paying better attention to these issues, and also in no small part because of attention on frameworks like the UN SDGs. We are able to really understand this key concept that these issues are not separate or separable. To really make progress on any of them, we need to recognize that the equity conversation is not actually separate from the economic conversation, is not actually separate from the environmental conversation. And I think that's one of the key lessons that we are all, I think, taking to heart, and that's really promising and important. At Sustainable Pittsburgh, we are working on a lot of collaborative projects, one of which is centered around regionalizing the UN SDG framework with a number of partners, many of whom have already spoken on this call, from New Sun Rising, Forbes Funds, the city, and so many others. To work to measure sustainability regionally. And that helps enforce the concept, again, that these subjects are intersectional, and it really takes not just folks working in environment or equity, but also people at the table from communities, from organizations, working communities, from local government, from the business sector, to be able to have these conversations about what we need to do to move these topics forward. So it feels like a lifetime ago, but it was really just over a year that the Business Roundtable redefined the purpose of a corporation to include that business entities should meet the needs of all stakeholders. They should serve customers, employees, suppliers, and communities. And that is a lesson, I think, that has been really taken to heart since that time, and especially in light of the renewed conversation about race, about justice. We are starting to see more and more corporate engagement on these topics and ways to be active. And so I'm excited to be here today to speak with our panel in just a few minutes, but wanted to make sure to kind of give that stage setting conversation. The mission of Sustainable Pittsburgh is quite broad in the sense that sustainability is quite broad. But one of the most important messages that I can give today and can leave you with today is that these topics really are all interconnected. You need that essential context of what's happening in our communities and what is necessary to get to an equitable future that also preserves and grows our environment and economy. Hi, everyone. And it's my pleasure now to introduce our panel. So for some businesses, the pandemic has served as an opportunity to ramp up sustainability practices. In many sectors, there's been a call for a business-led green recovery, reviving our economy in a more sustainable way to meet the future challenges that we will be facing, including the climate crisis. Here in Pittsburgh, we are very lucky to have a number of executives who are forward-thinking and have placed sustainability at the heart of their businesses. So I'm excited to be joined here today by two of those leaders. David Landis, president of Epic Metals, a leading manufacturer of steel roof and floor deck sealing systems, and Justine Russo, director of sustainability and business intelligence for Pitt, Ohio, a leader in transportation and logistics services. So welcome, David and Justine. So glad to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. Let's start with you, David. Tell us about Epic Metals' sustainability journey. When and how did it start? Where are you now? And what's around the corner for you in terms of goals?
I'd like to thank the Covestro team for having the 2020 THINC30 Summit virtually. And I'd also like to thank Sustainable Pittsburgh and Joylette for their leadership. Epic's sustainability journey began with its inception in 1968. My father, a University of Pittsburgh civil engineering graduate, started Epic Metals. With very limited capital, its first manufacturing building, located in Rankin, was originally built in 1900 as a barn to store trolleys at night. In essence, the trolley barn was recycled into a manufacturing building. Although the dirt floors and trolley tracks were removed before I began to work at Epic in 1989, the building was not insulated, and when it snowed outside, it could also be snowing inside through the cracks in the corrugated windows. In the 1990s, I led the transition to insulate the building and to install central heating in the manufacturing space. Today, 52 years later from the start, Epic Metals is the oldest member of our industry association, the Steel Deck Institute. Our modern sustainability movement began in 2010. As a summer high school project, I asked my son to investigate the installation of a small project of solar panels on our roof in Braddock. Almost every year since 2010, the solar energy we've produced from the sun has increased as we have expanded our solar energy projects. Our manufacturing plant in Florida has operated 100% on solar energy for 42 months. At all of our manufacturing locations in Pennsylvania, we have solar panels or wind stacks, vertical axis wind turbines to generate sustainable energy. We offer to our employees that make the transition to driving electric or plug-in hybrid cars up to $2,000 to encourage their change. To date, we've had 7 employees commit to the transition. Through September, the use of electric charging stations at Epic has displaced the burning of over 5,800 gallons of gasoline. These 7 people represent 5% of our employees. Through September, the solar and wind energy that Epic has generated is over 1,855,000 kilowatt hours. This would be enough energy to power an electric car to travel around the Earth 163 times or over 4 million miles. With the help of the sun and the wind, we currently generate approximately 50% of the electricity we use naturally. We use geothermal heating and cooling over 50% of the space of our main office located in Braddock. Our future goals would be to only use the electrical utility grid power as backup for naturally generated electrical energy. Another goal would be through our encouragement to have 50% of our employees driving electric or plug-in hybrid cars. I estimate that at 50%, we could displace the burning of 33,000 gallons of gasoline per year. This would reduce the emissions of 651,000 pounds of CO2 each year.
Great. Thank you so much. That was so impressive, and it's always so impressive to hear about everything that you are doing at Epic. Justine, before we get into further questions, let's turn to Justine, and I'm wondering if you can tell us about Pitt, Ohio's experience. How did you start on your sustainability journey? Where are you now, and where does the road lead? No pun intended.
I'll take it. So for us, it started right from the top. And before I get into it, again, thank you, Covestro. Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you for letting Dave. It's an honor to be on this part of the call with you. So it started from the top. Our owner and president, Chuck Hamill, went to the executive team and said, I want sustainability to be a core competency of Pitt, Ohio. And no one understood what that word was. That was back in 2011. So we've been at it for a while. And at first, our operations team was like, what is this? What is this word? Why are you giving me something else to do? But what was really exciting is that they saw everything that they were already doing to run efficiently, to improve miles per gallon, and to reduce energy at their facilities were all sustainability initiatives. Everything that they were doing for employee engagement was a sustainability initiative. And really what sustainability did for us was it enabled us to knit together the story of what we were doing to be good community members and a great place to work. Right now is really exciting. Like what David just went through, we also have a renewable energy initiative. And we finally opened our new Cleveland facility as of yesterday. This particular facility has over 1,500 solar panels and 8 of the wind stacked vertical wind turbines, feeding into a microgrid with 1 megawatt of storage. This was the year, too, our vehicle maintenance team really doubled down on their commitment to miles per gallon. And so far this year, we've seen a 2% improvement in miles per gallon. That sounds so small, but for us, it can equate to almost 250,000 gallons of biodiesel fuel saved. People, you see trucks going down the road and you're like, boy, that doesn't look sustainable. Moving freight is estimated to be about 10% of U.S. carbon emissions, according to the EPA. So the long-term vision for us is to see if we can get electric trucks powered off of our renewable energy microgrid. And as our customers are measuring their Scope 3 emissions, we want to be a partner and be able to provide them an estimate of those emissions. And we're currently working on a new carbon emissions report that uses the exact truck that the freight was on, with an estimate of the gallons of fuel used, all the way from the pickup to the eventual delivery. So that's kind of our roadmap of where we're at in the short-term future.
Thanks so much. And it's so interesting to hear, too, about the different ways that you're able to weave the sustainability story together, which I do want to come back to as we have a minute, as we get into our questions. But first, let me start by asking you both. This has been an interesting and challenging year. What impact has the pandemic had on your plans, if any?
The pandemic this year caused us to invest in updating our common spaces for better social distancing. Additionally, we've been disinfecting our common areas twice a week. We're certainly optimistic that the general economy will continue to improve in 2021, allowing EPIC to make further investments in sustainability, sustainable energy. It certainly, this year has definitely put a pause in some of our efforts.
Yeah, I would build on that and say, at first I was like, oh, so many of our sustainability initiatives are on hold. But I was thinking, and I was like, I talked earlier about core competencies, and we really focus on service, safety, and sustainability. And they're really all very intertwined. And we had to take quite a bit of precautions to protect employees at the terminal and when they were out at customers' locations. Continuing to be able to deliver freight was critical, especially for some of the PPE and other critical items. So it changed what we were doing, but not why we were doing it or the results we were seeing.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. And, I can understand that also, that what of sustainability and why it's important hasn't really changed at all during this time. It's only become more, I think, important and more obvious in certain aspects than in others. So here's another question for both of you, and this kind of gets back to this idea of how you've woven sustainability into the sustainability story in all aspects, from employee engagement to carbon reduction, into your business operations. So Epic Metals and Pitt, Ohio are both founding participants in the CEOs for Sustainability, which is the executive network roundtable that Sustainable Pittsburgh hosts. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of the challenges you faced in embedding sustainability into your business and how you overcame them.
It's been challenging to convince our employees to make the shift to driving electric or plug-in hybrid cars. Again, we're currently at about 5% of our 140 employees that have made the transition. So, we have tried to provide education, and I wish we would have had more employees make the transition And I am optimistic that in the near future we'll continue to grow and we will get to having 50% or more of our employees that will be driving more sustainable vehicles.
Thanks. That thought leadership is so important. Justine?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the challenges is that we have 20 terminals, each in very unique geographic locations and all with unique needs. So it can't be a one-size-fits-all. It needs to be kind of like 20 little sustainability plans. You know, we've got hilly areas and then we've got very flat areas. So miles per gallon can be very different depending on the terrain, depending on the weather. A diesel truck only has miles per gallon of about 6.5. And compared to your average car, it's like 20 to 25, and then a hybrid can be like 50, or if it's electric, you know, even more efficient than that. So it really, it's really challenging to see those numbers improve. And like I said, it can be frustrating when they don't move the way you want them to.
Yeah, for sure. There are definitely challenges depending on what industry, what your industry looks like. And, you know, I completely appreciate the, 20 different sustainability plans. I think one thing that is important to keep in mind is that there isn't really a one-size-fits-all approach. It really does depend on where your biggest impacts will be felt, and what's material to your company. So, here's a question: as a business leader in the region, what does sustainability mean to you personally, and why are you so passionate about it?
I'm passionate about sustainability because I believe in the science behind global climate change. I plan to contribute to leaving the planet a healthier place for my children, future grandchildren, and future generations to live. The pandemic is our current crisis. If we do not learn from our past, science predicts that global climate change could have much larger effects than even the current pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really well said, Dave.
Did you have anything to add to that, Justine?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I look at with sustainability, again, I kind of go back to our operations team, and they were like, oh, this is just about being green and being a tree hugger. But I think what's been really exciting is seeing the innovation behind sustainability. You really have to think differently about your business and how you can do things differently. And that becomes really exciting. I think the other thing personally for me that I really appreciated was the passion that other people have. When I attend THINC30, or if I attend an Allegheny conference webinar, it's really exciting to see that people are committed to try to do better and try to improve this region. I mean, this is our home, and I want it to have a very successful future.
Thanks very much. We have a question from the audience, and that is, if either of you can comment on what advice you have for other companies who are trying to figure out how to start or expand their own sustainability journey.
I would say the advice that I would give to other businesses is that when we began our modern sustainability journey, it was by taking a very small step. And each year we've been monitoring our progress and setting goals to achieve further sustainability improvements. Developing more sustainable practices by small and large companies can contribute to improving the environment.
Thanks very much. Justine, any advice for companies wanting to get started or expand their sustainability efforts?
Yeah, so like David was saying, I'm a data person. I have this weird title of sustainability and business intelligence. We're very data driven in showing what the results of our sustainability initiatives are. And I think this idea of taking an inventory of where you're at is a great starting place. We talked a little bit, Joylette, about materiality and looking at what are the key drivers in your own organization. And I think what's also great, as David was saying, it gives you where you might need more focus. But I think for us personally, it showed us where to celebrate wins. And I kind of building on what I said before too, if you're here in southwestern Pennsylvania, there is so many partnerships and resources available to you. There are universities, there's this conference, look at what Covestro is doing by bringing so many people together, including the peer group like Sustainable Pittsburgh that you had up. And what's also been really nice is how open everyone is to share their successes, but also to share, maybe where things didn't work so well, and really sharing those lessons learned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll echo that there are so many resources, and yes, at Sustainable Pittsburgh we have many. So feel free to reach out and get in contact with us as well, whoever asked that question. I think that it is also important, just to build on what both of you have said, is to have that commitment and to be exercising that leadership within your company or organization. There's nothing like trying if you want to accomplish something, I always say. So, I think getting started is taking that first step is really important, as David was saying. Okay, another audience question. It seems you've both engaged strongly with UN SDGs 7, 8, and 9, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, and industry innovation and infrastructure. What efforts have you made, if any, toward engaging with UN SDG 10 around reducing inequalities?
Well, I think it's you first have to recognize the problem, and I think that when you follow the news and you see some of the inequalities that are occurring, and as Grant said, I think earlier, again, the area that we're in, Braddock, Rankin, is a relatively depressed area, definitely more depressed than what Millville has been. And when you see, this area back in the 20s had over 20,000 residents, and now is around 2,000 residents. So when you think of what has happened, this area has been decimated by the fast-paced changes of the economy. And certainly, we're doing our best. I'm a board member of the Braddock Carnegie Library, which was the first Carnegie Library in the United States. And at one point in time, the Carnegie Libraries represented over 60% of the public libraries in the whole country. And we're doing our best to try to preserve the first Carnegie Library that was opened in the United States. And that is a resource to the community. And so by helping that resource, we're trying to show our commitment to improving equality.
Justine, did you want to add anything about Pitt, Ohio's work?
Yeah, we have our HR team working on our diversity and inclusion policies. Everybody knows it's challenging to find the right employee, especially in trucking. Not everybody wants to drive a truck nowadays, but it's critically important to have, I think, a workplace that is open and welcoming, and really, I think what David said was really recognize the challenges that are out there.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question and an important one as we're, having this conversation about environmental justice. I think, this kind of gets back to that earlier concept of how do you weave in, the equity piece, the community engagement piece into these conversations about environmental sustainability. And, I think there's a lot that companies can do, as you've mentioned, from having equity and inclusion practices and review to encouraging community volunteerism, like the kind David was mentioning, to encouraging community engagement, to supply chain diversity, to really kind of grappling with these topics as a good community member as well. And so I think that's a great question and great work that is happening around that. There's another question to ask. So you talked a little bit about the pandemic and its impact kind of on your operations, but can you talk a little bit further about how whether or how the pandemic has impacted your sustainability efforts?
I think it has temporarily put a hold on some of our efforts to continue to expand our solar panel projects. We have also, in the midst of the pandemic, we had when one of the hurricanes, although when it passed through Pittsburgh, the winds weren't that high, but it took a portion of one of our roofs off of our building. And so we temporarily put it back together. But our goal is to continue to add additional solar panels to the roofs of our buildings so that we can get to the point where we are, just relying on the grid as a backup to the energy that we receive from the sun and the wind. And so it has, our investment efforts have been more towards the interiors of our building, trying to, as I mentioned, create better social distance environments for our common areas, which, again, some of our buildings date back to 1900. So you can imagine that the lunchrooms and the restrooms weren't designed for social distancing. So that's where some of our investments have been, in those areas, to make them better for the pandemic. And they'll be better when the pandemic is gone, for whether it's just a normal flu season or whatever. We hope that there'll be healthier environments for our employees.
Mm-hmm. And I like that phrasing and that terminology, thinking about sustainability work really as an investment, right? Something that will pay off, right? in the future, near or long-term future. So thanks for that. Justine?
Yeah, I have one positive and one negative. So I talked a little bit about how our vehicle maintenance team was doubling down on miles per gallon improvement. And they've been doing a great job. They've been doing more tire inspections, more preventative maintenance, and we've really seen the numbers go up. But then we saw the numbers go up even more than we expected, and I want to attribute it to less traffic on the road. Less stopping and starting, and they've really blown their goal out of the water, which, our carbon, our net carbon, not even normalizing our net carbon, I think is down about 2% so far this year. So between the miles per gallon improvement and the less traffic on the roads, we'll see as people start going back, should the vaccine, go into effect, if we lose that improvement. On the negative side, I also mentioned we just opened our Cleveland facility on Monday. It was really a lot of thought that went into how do you open a facility and keeping people safe and socially distant, and it took a while. That building was probably ready to go in early spring. I had heard that we were planning on opening in June, and obviously it's October now. We're really excited that it's open, but yeah, it did change how we had to approach some of our initiatives this year.
Okay. We have another question, which is actually one that I'm going to take a first crack at, I think, which is about what roles at companies are taking the sustainability lead. So is this something that comes out of procurement or risk or compliance or investor relations or some other role? I think often organizations that have the capacity to invest in a sustainability position, that's the position that takes that role. But often it can be operations. I think health and safety is another office out from which environmental sustainability projects often arise. So let me throw it to both of you. We're running out of time in our panel, but I'm sure you have thoughts on this as well.
I think it really fits into every department. We do paper recycling and printer cartridge recycling and aluminum can recycling. So it's really getting all departments and everybody participating in the movement and the education. And some of that education, of course, when I was talking about the decrease in gasoline that is provided by the use of our charging stations. Of course, people who have these plug-in or hybrid vehicles, they drive them at home and they use them away from charging at Epic, so that they're involved in their personal lives. So you really want to get everybody thinking sustainability, not only at work, but also at their homes, and really a life cycle event.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really great note to end on, because we are running out of time, but it does really take everybody. It could be anybody at an organization with enough initiative to start, but it's all of us working together that's going to make the difference on all of these fronts. All of the UN SDGs are going to take insights and expertise from everyone. So thanks very much for being with us today, sharing your stories and expertise, and really impressive commitments and results at your companies. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you.
Planet or profit? People or profit? Making a difference or making a living? These are all false choices. My name is Laura Asiala, and if you remember nothing else today from my talk, I hope you will remember that when confronted with seemingly binary choices, there is always a third way. And that's where the real innovation happens. It just requires that we think differently, which is why I'm so honored to be a part of these proceedings. And it's with great appreciation to Covestro and Rebecca Lucor for pulling together leaders in this now much broader community, seeking to move from traditional to sustainable businesses, organizations, communities, the world. I've spent the better part of 3 decades in a quest to make business better, to harness the enormous power of capital, talent, and know-how, to put it in service to the world instead of the other way around. And there are 3 lessons I've learned that I'd like to share with you today. First, profit is not a bad word. However you define or measure it, it will guide human behavior, just as it has for millennia. In business, profit is like oxygen. If you can't breathe, you can't live. But we also don't live to breathe. We live for a greater purpose. It's been my good fortune over the years to mentor people in the formative years of their careers, and I always tell them, don't confuse tax status with mission. You can find lots of businesses working in service and earning a profit. My ideal is that someday that will be the definition of all businesses. Secondly, you have to lead from where you stand. It's the only place to get leverage. Everything else is just a leap. And for those of you who are working in businesses that are struggling, and it is hard work to move from a traditional single bottom line to a triple bottom line, environmental stewardship, equitable opportunity, and economic success, you still and always need to make the business case to step from where you are to where you want to go. 4 things to remember here. 1, all businesses require revenue growth, and anytime you are able to expand beyond your current market with an eye of servicing people in affordable, valuable, and profitable ways, that's a win. Secondly, all businesses are constantly under pressure to reduce expenses. And one of the most straightforward ways to do that is becoming more energy and resource efficient, which has the dual impact of lowering your footprint and your expenses. Operations, purchasing, logistics, and other supply chain professionals are often the heroes in these efforts. And some of you may think that's boring, but operations and logistics are exciting and impactful ways to make a difference. All businesses require talent. Those businesses making the move from traditional to sustainable find it easier to attract, engage, and retain the human talent to deliver value to their customers, which in turn translates to return on investment for their shareholders. And 4th, all businesses require capital, and the better your performance in environmental, societal, and governance, or ESG factors, the more attractive your debt and equity. Relatively higher stock prices, relatively lower interest rates. Who knew the chief sustainability officer and the chief financial officer would become best friends? Which brings me to my final point. Find a friend or friends. Did I mention this is hard work? Nothing difficult is ever easy. Why does that always surprise us? Are you getting resistance and leading a sustainable transformation in your organization? Good. It's working. But this can be lonely work too. So find a friend. Find your peeps. Look around you in this great virtual room. There are lots of people that you can go to for encouragement, solace, practice, advice, ideas, and resources, including me. You'll find me at the Council of the Great Lakes Region. Y'all are invited. WholeWorks, Pixera Global, Net Impact, GreenBiz, LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me there and tell me how we met. I wish I was there in person today. Of course. Doesn't everyone? But the sliver of a silver lining in this year of horrific natural disasters, global pandemic, racial unrest, and economies that have screeched to a halt is that this community has become bigger. Covestro used to encourage the community of Pittsburgh and surrounding areas to think differently to address global challenges. And today, they've reached the shores of Lake Michigan and beyond. I'm grateful to have been in this room with you today. Thank you for including me.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear? Okay, good. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim McDonald. I lead sustainable development for Covestro here in the U.S., and I help drive our regional efforts to reach our non-financial targets. So among our global goals are reducing emissions and energy. Obviously, there's a lot of both coming from a large manufacturer. So if you want to reduce anything, you got to know what your numbers are. You got to know your baseline, and then you can use it to track, plan, and make improvements. And disclosure, reporting is also a significant requirement for us. And we need accurate and timely information. And you want to streamline that process as much as possible because some of those reporting frameworks are really complex. So all that data, consumption, spend, production has to be integrated. It has to be automated. analyzed and socialized so that you can act on it. While Covestro knows a lot about chemistry and engineering, but we need help with cutting edge IT, energy systems, technologies, and analysis. And that is where Environmental Defense Fund's Climate Corps Fellow Program comes in. So EDF connects top graduate national student talent with business to really intensely tackle energy-related projects in a short period of time. And you get findings that are ready for the next phase, whether it's strategy, development, and implementation. So, if we're looking to examine scope 3 emissions in our supply chain or do something really complex with energy modeling, EDF has a network and they offer unique proficiencies that help us bring ideas into existence. So this is my 5th project with EDF, and we didn't even have to go outside of Pittsburgh this year to find someone with extreme skill and talent and knowledge, and that is Jeff Scanlon, who joins me today. He is a graduate student at Carnegie Mellon's Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy, and Jeff finished his fellowship with us, did an outstanding job with our energy modeling capabilities. I could talk about that all day, but he also really helped us open up our own community dialogue on the closely connected challenge of environmental and racial justice. So welcome, Jeff. Maybe you can start by just telling us a little bit about the EDF Climate Corps Fellow Program, how and why you got involved, and your interest in energy, climate, and information systems.
Thanks, Kim. As you've correctly alluded to, the EDF Climate Corps program matches grad students with host companies to advance environmental goals. These projects run the gamut from energy efficiency to reducing greenhouse gas emissions to supply chain and procurement. Over 450 organizations have participated in this program, and 1 out of 3 Fortune 100 companies have participated. So first, I'll say that if there are any graduate students who are listening to this chat, or if there are any organizations listening who would be interested in hosting a fellow, I believe that the applications are currently live on the EDF Climate Corps website, so please take a look. As for me, there are a number of reasons why I got involved. First and foremost, I've decided that I want to use my career to mitigate the effects of climate change and build our collective resilience. I think there are some beliefs that underpin these motives for me, one of which is just a supreme respect for life, for our planet's natural resources, and for the incredible biodiversity that exists on our planet. Scientists are warning that we are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction event in our planet's history, and this event is largely caused by human activity. And I'd like to be involved in stopping this as much as possible. And secondly, my graduate program has a strong focus on using data analytics for intelligent action. And I'm really inspired by the idea that the climate crisis and environmental crises in general are not hopeless, but that we can start to make real gains with some creative solutions. And I think that I can apply my skills in data analysis as just one of these many creative solutions that people can offer. And it looks like there's...
Okay, so I'm having a little trouble with my audio here. Hope you can hear me. So let's move right into how climate and industry intersects environmental justice. There is a lot to unpack, a lot of history, the disproportionate pollution or climate burden that communities experience, that's been the focus of environmental justice movement, even before EPA was established 50 years ago. But the visibility, and the message just hasn't clearly resonated or registered with the public, and it hasn't resulted in meaningful change. So from your perspective, do you think current events are propelling enough awareness and a new movement around environmental and racial justice?
Yeah, that's right, Kim. Dr. Robert Bullard is considered the father of environmental justice, and he began some of the foundational environmental justice work in the 1970s and 80s when he started to notice that toxic waste facilities were almost exclusively located in Houston's predominantly Black neighborhoods. And he continued to expand his work to examine how this might be playing out in communities across the southern United States. He understood his work to be a kind of merging between the environmental and civil rights movements of the previous 10 to 20 years. And so I think your question about current events is a good one. And one way to understand how these events are increasing our awareness is to think about it like Dr. Bullard did, through both the civil and environmental lenses. On the civil and social front, we know that the fight for civil rights continues into today. This fight takes on a somewhat different form and may tackle different issues than it did in the 60s. So, for example, today we're seeing calls to end police brutality, for equitable hiring practices, and more diverse representation at all levels within business. And we see people continuing to fight for voting rights as well. And the same is true for the environmental movement. While in the past, as you've rightly stated, the movement focused initially on land use and conservation, followed by water and air pollution, we now see the movement centering around climate change. And the effects of climate change are so immediate and so close to home that it becomes really hard to ignore. This year, we've witnessed record-setting fires in the Western United States. 2010 to 2019 was the hottest decade ever recorded, and the 2020 hurricane season has also set many records. And these current events draw our attention to these issues. And I think there's also something to say about the role of social media and young people here too. Younger generations have often been involved in many of the major social movements in our country. You can think of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Children's March or the Children's Crusade in Birmingham, Alabama, during the Civil Rights Movement. But more recently, you can also think of, the March for Our Lives, which is the gun reform campaign led by school students. I would also add climate action to this list and point to, Greta Thunberg as a great example of a leader here. So to the extent that these larger civil and social and environmental movements are building, I think that there are many people who, like Dr. Bullard, are trying to connect the dots and are saying, hey, maybe these issues aren't all that disconnected after all. Maybe there's a lot of overlap here. And so these current events are forcing us to ask questions like, are these systems equitable? Who benefits from these systems? Who's hurt or burdened by them? And who has the power within these systems and who doesn't? And so I do think that current events are helping to to propel our awareness of these issues. Can you hear me now, Kim?
So Jeff, still having audio issues, I apologize. But so as a future sustainable development leader, and you are a leader in my opinion, from your experience, insight, and what you've learned from the many different groups that you've interacted with this year, and your experience overall, what do you think business and industry should do or could do to address environmental and racial justice in the short term and keep the momentum going?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done right now. In the past several months, we've seen companies making statements of support for the Black Lives Matter movement. And we've also seen many activists and citizens saying that statements are simply not enough. And I would agree. First, I would say that a company can't begin to address environmental justice without also considering race and racial justice. Because environmental justice has two parts. The first is about ensuring that race is not an indicator or a predictor of how the benefits and burdens of environmental hazards are skewed. But the second is about ensuring that all people have equal access or equal representation within the decision-making process for creating healthy and happy environments to work in and to live in. So first, I think that companies should take an inward look. Do you have diverse representation across all levels of your company? And are all of those diverse voices equally valued and given equal power within the decision-making process? And second, I would say you can't really begin to know what to change or how to improve if you haven't put the time, energy, and resources into evaluating your environmental impact. And importantly, it's not just determining the impact on the environment, but on the people and communities that are a part of that environment. And so I think companies can also look outward, can look externally and ask, are we creating inequitable outcomes for certain demographic groups because of our environmental impacts? And how are we engaging communities and giving them a space for feedback and for sharing their opinions within our decision-making process? And for some industries, these questions may be harder to answer than for others. If you're a company that's consuming a lot of natural resources or generating a lot of waste or polluting the air, then it's a little easier to evaluate the environmental impact of those actions on the surrounding communities. But for a company whose biggest environmental impact is, for example, electricity consumption, this becomes much trickier because you need to understand where that electricity is coming from, how it's being generated, and you need to try to estimate the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are being produced each year. And we know that those emissions go up into the atmosphere. And I think we tend to believe that because our atmosphere spans the globe, the burdens of global warming will be shared equitably across the globe. But it's important to recognize that that's not actually true. Many countries are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change compared to others. One report that I read from the journal Nature said that 20 of the 36 highest emitting countries are among the least vulnerable to negative climate impacts, while 11 of the 17 countries with low or moderate emissions are very vulnerable to these negative impacts. The paper found that only 16% of countries, in fact, had equitable balance between emissions and vulnerability, and that this inequality is only going to grow by 2030. And so it's important then to think about this problem of equity across a global scale in addition to a local scale. And so this is all to say that evaluating your environmental impact, your footprint, is not necessarily an easy task, but it's an essential first step to making progress on this front.
So, Jeff, one of the questions that we have here from the participants, and this is kind of relates to a question I wanted to ask, as business, we look at the Sustainable Development Goals. We've been talking about them a lot today. So we have our business goals, but do you and your colleagues have this 2020 or 2030 vision, I should say? What would you like to see happen in terms of energy, resource efficiency, climate change, environmental justice, and encourage more of that at the UN level and all around? This is going to be part of your career.
Yeah, this is a really good question. And I know that we're running a little short on time, so I'll do my best to answer it as quickly as possible. I can't necessarily speak for all my colleagues, and there are certainly various ideological camps for how people think we should approach climate action. Some kind of favor the idea of incrementalism, taking small, manageable steps one at a time, while others favor larger, more sweeping changes to our energy and resource infrastructure. The Environmental Defense Fund has a slogan that I like, which is finding the ways that work. I think this is a good way to think about these problems. There's certainly not a one-size-fits-all magic bullet solution, and I think that we need to tackle these in any way that we can. But one thing that I do think we need right now is some, basic federal leadership on these issues. The U.S. needs to recommit to the Paris Climate Accords and commit to reaching science-based targets for greenhouse gas emission reduction. We know that, while the U.S. has withdrawn from these accords, the private sector and local and state governments have really stepped up to fill that void that was created. And so now we see private companies are increasingly doing their part to calculate footprints. Local and state governments are committing to cutting energy consumption, reducing emissions, transitioning to renewable energy. And I think the one thing that we really need to do is get some federal leadership here and make sure that the federal government is really aligning all of our work and all of our actions so that we're all working towards the same goal. They can do that by developing incentive structures, allocating funds to these larger goals, expanding and enforcing regulations, and really just directing the future of our economy to make sure that we get ahead of the curve and be leaders in the clean power industry. And also to make sure that the new kind of green economy works for every American. So that's what I would say.
So, Jeff, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to work with you. I'm grateful for discussions like this. See lots of questions about EDF. If anyone would like to learn more about working with the EDF Climate Corps Fellow Program, you can feel free to contact me at Covestro. Certainly we'll have more to share in the future on actions we're taking as a company on environmental and racial justice. And we welcome input from everyone online today because it takes a lot of input and energy to keep the momentum going. So thanks again, Jeff. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Wow. Really, really good discussions today. I'm so pleased with the participation and the speakers and the panelists. Thank you all for your expertise. When we thought about planning these meetings, we took into consideration Zoom fatigue, and we wanted to keep the day short, but the discussion strong. And there's obviously a lot of interest in these topics. I think we could go on longer on them. So please stay tuned. We hope to continue these discussions into next year and follow up on some of these topics, very important topics. And we heard a lot today about, inequalities, climate, strategies, starting small and building your sustainability strategy. We learned a lot about environmental equity, some new words that we haven't heard in the past, but because of what's going on in our country, in our world now with racial inequalities, those topics are coming more to light. What I like that we did not hear today is we did not hear from anyone that due to this pandemic, they've put sustainability on hold at their company, at their organization, in the region. Now more than ever, it's moving full steam ahead. It's not stopping. So that's always great to see and to know. I want to thank, again, all the speakers and panelists. I really want to thank the technical team, Michael and Chris and your group for helping us today. All of my colleagues at Covestro, thank you so much for your involvement. And we want to encourage all of you to now participate in a breakout session. This will happen if you were with us last week a little differently. We're going to have one breakout session. And this is your chance to really guide the conversation, to dig deeper into topics and issues you want to talk more about, to pose questions maybe you didn't have the chance to during discussions today. So we encourage you to go into the chat box. My colleague Ben has put a link there, and you can click on that link. That is the link that will take you out to the discussion after this. So again, we encourage you all to participate. Again, please share your photos of you participating today. We'd love to see them. We'd love to have you tweet them at hashtag THINC30. And I hope that a lot of you will be joining us, if not all of you, for our last discussion on Thursday. Economic empowerment, such another very critical discussion in terms of sustainability, another great day of speakers. So I hope you can join us. We hope to see you then. And for all of you, we will follow up. There'll be a survey and more information after the events. Thank you all again. And please join us now at the breakout.